It marks civilization's earliest attempt at manufacturing and first example of property. But the clay pot also signifies man's contract with the environment, that all human creation is based on the destruction of nature.
You see, the most interesting story in the Vishnu Puran, in fact the first story of the Vishnu Puran, is about how organizations are created and why organizations grow. And it begins with the story of a fish. You see, Vishnu takes many avatars, as we know, many forms, and the first incarnation is of a fish. And it is always interesting as to why was it a fish, why was it not a tadpole, or why was it not a butterfly, why is it a fish? And then you think of the word Matsya Nyaya, a law of the fishes, which is basically jungle law, might is right. And the story begins with this little tiny fish approaching Manu, and Manu being the ancestor of mankind, Manava, Manu, and asking Manu that, you know, save me from the big fish. So he's being told, save me from the big fish. Now, in nature, nobody will save the small fish from the big fish.
Right.
That's the natural law. The predator and the prey have a relationship. But when humans appear on the scene, we say, you know what, we will not submit to the law of nature. We will help the helpless.
Right.
We will create a world where the meek have rights, which is basically culture. So that is exactly what Manu does when he picks up the small fish in the palm of his hand and takes him out of the sea. So basically disrupting nature. In a way, he's disrupting the law of nature, and then takes him and puts him in a pot and says, you'll be safe here. So in a way, the pot represents the organization, where the fish has been placed, and here it is safe now. So there's a separation between the sea, the water in the sea, which is nature, and water in the pot, which is culture.
Got it.
And this demands utilization of resources, because the water, the fish, the earth, the pot, clay has not come from a vacuum, it has come from nature.
Right.
Then the fish increases in size.
It grows bigger.
It grows bigger, which means it needs more water, it needs a bigger pot, and so a larger pot has to be designed.
So Manu builds a larger pot for the fish.
And shifts him from the small pot to the big pot, and that is growth. And that's why organizations grow. And as organizations grow, they will demand more of the natural resources.
Right.
It's just natural. This is the way it is going to be.
And so the fish continues to grow and grow?
And as organizations continue to grow and grow, and demanding more and more from nature.
I get that, but is it also not implicit in our scriptures? And this is something that we learn instinctively, right? That all creation is accompanied with destruction.
Yes.
I mean, if we were to believe the broad theory that everything in the world is just energy,
yes,
and it's all about the transfer of energy from one form of matter to another form of matter, all creation is almost always accompanied by destruction.
Yes.
And that is implicitly accepted in our scriptures, isn't it?
Yes. You see, let's look at the image of Durga. When you go to Durga Pandala in Calcutta during Durga Puja, Dasara, what do you see? An image of a mother goddess, and she's slaughtering a buffalo. Now, a very simple answer is that buffalo bad, God is good, good killing bad. But it also means that in order to feed her children, she is taking life. She's taking life of something or the other, so that life feeds on life. So in a way, the mother goddess is saying, in order to feed my children, something has to die. So the forest has to be destroyed so that the field can be created. The river has to be destroyed so that canals can be created. The mountain has to be destroyed so that minerals can be created. And that is the mother goddess violently. It's a very violent form. Blood is flowing. That's the idea of sacrifice. A reminder that for everything that you have created in society, remember, something has died. So ask yourself, why are you creating what you are creating? Why are you creating the organization? Why do you want to grow? Because every time you create an organization or you create growth, you are going to feed on nature. Is it worth it? If not, don't do it. But if you can, be aware that something will always die.
Is the sanction also implicit? I mean, are the scriptures or is mythology implicitly giving you the sanction to destroy nature so as to be able to build culture?
You see, mythology, as I have said repeatedly, is not prescriptive.
Right.
Mythology is reflective. which means it tells you what you are doing in the form of a narrative. So, for example, the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira tells Krishna that I want to build a city.
This is after he wins the war.
No, the story happens that Yudhishthira goes to his uncle and says that I want my share of the property, because there's a lot of conflict between the two cousins. So finally said, let's just divide the property and that'll be good that way. So what he does is, the uncle gives him the forest, a forest called Khandavprasth, and says, take this. Now Yudhishthira says, I want to build a city in the forest. What will I do with the forest? I want to turn it into a city, a kingdom. And so he talks to his friend Krishna, and Krishna says, burn the forest. Now think about it. You've been given a forest, and the first thing you're being told, burn the forest. And what will happen when you burn the forest? All the animals, the birds,
you're killing the ecosystem.
They're destroying the entire ecosystem. And Krishna says, if you don't destroy the forest, how will you create the field? How will you feed your people? So in effect, the story tells that the king who wants a kingdom must take responsibility for the fact that in order to build his kingdom, in order to feed his people, he's going to destroy an ecosystem. And the story continues because we are told that there were serpents who lived in that forest, in the Khandavaprastha. This Khandavaprastha, which is inhabited by serpents, many other animals, including the serpents. So when you set it aflame, they burn the forest. All the animals are killed, including the serpents.
Right.
And then the serpents escape. A couple of serpents escape, and forever there is a feud between the Pandavas on one side, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and the serpents. And in fact, the Mahabharata story begins with this great sacrifice where a descendant of the Pandavas wants to kill the serpents because the serpents are killing his relatives. And he thinks that the serpents are the villains. And then the storyteller comes in and says, wait a minute, before you declare the serpents villains, please know what your ancestors did to the serpents. How their kingdom was destroyed by this fire in order to establish the city of Indraprastha. So implicit in the narrative is how conflicts are created. Because in order to build your organization, you're going to destroy nature. When you destroy nature, you destroy an ecosystem. That means you're taking away the livelihood of others. So if they exist, there will be conflict between those who have been stripped of it and the organization. So conflict is implicit in culture.
I understand that conflict is part of creating culture and that it's embedded in culture, but the question that it leaves us with, and the question we're grappling with today as well in modern day, is how much is too much? We're all seeing the consequences of over-exploiting the environment.
Yes.
Or taking away from nature, and it's ironic because we are not the perpetrators of this crime.
Yes.
And yet we're paying for it. So how much is too much? And why can't the consequences of actions be more immediate? And therefore previous generations would have paid for the kind of damage that they did to the environment, as opposed to us having to pay.
Yeah. You see, it depends on the line of sight that you have. In a previous episode, I had talked about Garuda Drishti, the long sight, and Sarpa Drishti, which is short sight. And we spoke about how dangerous it is when a leader only has short sight and does not have long sight. What do we mean by long sight? Every action that we do is having repercussions over generations. But if my focus is on this quarter's profit, then I really don't care about the long-term implications of my actions. I'm so focused on the short term that I've forgotten the long term. Now, what happens at a very selfish level is that I say that I don't have to pay the price. I'm the CEO, I make my money and I move on, and the next CEO will suffer the consequences of my actions. This applies at a larger scale. So generation level, one generation says, we will do what we want, and the next generation is to pay for it. And therefore this whole mythological idea that a child inherits the sins of his father. How much do we care for the next generation? In fact, it's not just about caring for the next generation. How much do we care for people who don't immediately around us? There's this strange phrase, not in my backyard, which basically says, I'll dump things so long as it doesn't affect me. But as we talk about a shrinking global village,
everything is
in your backyard, and now you're going to pay the price for it, because the same technology that enabled you to shrink is now going to get the serpents back.
You said that Krishna gave his sanction for the burning down of the forest in order to create a city, because he said, how do you create a city if you don't burn down the forest?
Yes.
It brings me back to the question that I asked you. How much is too much? How many forests can you burn down to continuously create cities? I almost know the answer to that. Yes. I understand that there has to be a balance between development and the environment. But is there any prescribed How much is too much?
Let's see it in the form of story. The same, Krishna is Vishnu, and Vishnu's first avatar was of a fish, and that's how we began the story of how organizations are created and how cultures grow.
And the fish is in a pot, and as the fish keeps growing, the pot keeps growing bigger to accommodate the fish.
And the story is very interesting after that, because it starts getting blurry. The fish starts getting larger and larger. It becomes so large that pots are not enough to accommodate it. So it is shifted to a pond, and then it is shifted to a lake. Then it is Manu shifts him to the river, and finally shifts him to the sea. And the next thing that we hear is pralay happens, doomsday. Because you see, what happens is the fish is so big that even the sea is not enough to accommodate it. So the rains have to come to fill the sea and to expand the sea so that it can accommodate the fish. And so as the sea starts to expand, it starts creeping over the land gets flooded, and Manu's land starts to get flooded, and he runs on top of the mountain, Mount Meru, and he's sitting on top of the mountain, and wondering what is happening, what has gone wrong, because wasn't he being very kind and gentle, and he was to try to give the fish more and more resources. You see, at no point did he ask, is that why can't the fish be content with the water in the pot? You are constantly wanting more and more. What is being reined in? Nature's resources are finite. But human desire is infinite. What was never asked is that at a particular point, the small fish has become a big fish and can fend for itself. That Manu didn't think. So the compassion which created the pot, when taken to an extreme, becomes his own destruction. Because he becomes so compassionate that he forgets to see the fish can fend for itself. And that's when need becomes greed, and the line between need and greed starts to blur. We don't talk about this. We talk about moral bankruptcy of corporations. It is not that the corporations which are morally bankrupt. It is also the shareholder which is demanding more and more in every quarter. It is the customer who's saying that, listen, I do care for the environment, but I'm not going to give up my car. And you know what? I will not give up my car. But the third world countries, why do they need cars? They should be happy with bullock carts. So I don't want, you see this conflict between, I want profit, but I also want my nature to be secure. It can't work both ways.
That's not possible.
That's not possible. Something has to give. So if you're not willing to give up your infinite desire, then the finite nature will take over. And pralay, what is the worst that will happen? 50% of the human population. Nature will always prevail in the end.
So the end is scripted in our scriptures,
It's scriptures.
so to speak.
So the first story of Vishnu Puran talks about the creation of organization as well as the destruction of an organization. And the balance, the word given is dharma. And as we have repeatedly talked about, dharma is about look at the other.
Right.
There is no such thing as your backyard. Everything is your backyard. That shift will happen, then dharma will happen. When I realize that where from comes the problem, whether it's an oil spill or Naxalites fighting, where are they coming from? They're coming from some activity that I am doing. This is my karma. My actions are leading to this reaction. Do I take responsibility for it, or think it's the devil's work? It's about taking responsibility for creating the mess that we have done. And the only way to handle it is not by punishing the serpent. It is by taking responsibility for our infinite greed.
So is there any sort of PS in the book that tells you what happens after pralay?
A rebirth happens. The new organizations are created. And the new world order starts, and hopefully a second chance is given. And even if you fail again, you see,
the same thing
will happen again.
So the
and
end
again
is
and
foretold.
The end is foretold.
Isn't that almost a disincentive to be environment conscious? Because you know that eventually, like organizations, like people, everything is going to come to an end. Now, whether it comes to an end tomorrow or 5,000 years later, it's still going to come to an end. So that there's no incentive in it then for us to be able to preserve the environment.
You cannot fight greed with logic. Greed is illogical. You are saying, give me a logical reason to combat something as illogical as greed. Greed is rooted in deep-seated human fear. Fear is illogical. So you're saying, give me logic, give me a mathematical template to deal with greedy people. It doesn't work. It won't work.
Next week on Business Sutra, Ram and Bharat, Sugriv and Bali, Ravan and Kuber, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. why every big story is about brothers and their battle over property.